Guys, did you know that by the time the main event went off, Islam Makhachev had climbed to about a minus 650 favorite? I'm sure the bettors were chasing their losses and boosting the line a little bit, but Dustin Poirier sure wasn't having it. He did not look like that big of an underdog as the fight played out. Respect to the diamond. We had ourselves a proper title fight with lots of tactics and adjustments that we weren't expecting over 4 rounds in change. I loved it. How about you guys? Let's get a reaction to the result. Nolan King, you were there cage side.
Yeah, it was fantastic, man. It was exactly what that card needed. The rest of the card was a bit slow leading up to it. I know we had a few moments throughout, from the Basil Hafez to the Mickey Gall fight, a couple submissions, one from Almeida, one from Kevin Holland. But this was just a next level MMA. It was one of those main events where you realize how good some of these guys really are, like what it is to watch two really elite fighters go at it. And I think for a lot of fans, and myself included, Dustin Poirier, even though he came out with a loss, surpassed our expectations of what we expected to see from him. I thought Dustin could potentially have a moment or two within the fight, but to have pretty consistent moments throughout that fight and make it a really competitive battle and give Islam Makhachev some problems at times with the body shots, with his elbows in the clinch. I thought that it was just a really great showing from both guys, but Islam's just next level, man. His ability to overcome, his ability to mix in his striking, I think we saw from him on Saturday more than we've seen in the past. And then ultimately, when it came to the wrestling, just incredible. The golf swing, ankle sweep, whatever you want to call it, was fantastic. And I think that was the game changer and ultimately led to the final sequence there. So just a really great fight, topped off by a great finish. And Dustin Poirier should be very proud too. If this was his last fight, what a way to go out. I think he got that respect from the crowd that we see sometimes in retirement fights, which was great to see as well. But if he also sticks around, I won't complain either to see a couple more battles from the Diamond before it's all said and done.
Mike Bond, you've been cage side for many title fights, many Dustin Poirier fights. This one wasn't as violent, right? I mean, I guess he did land a really nice elbow. He landed a nice right that hurt Makhachev early, but I'm talking about like the profuse sweating. But man, wasn't it fun watching it unfold? Makhachev had answers for Dustin's stand-up. Dustin had answers for Makhachev's grappling. That's the part that I loved, was just seeing the way this thing was unfolding. And you're always wondering, could history be made as it was unfolding? But what were you feeling that night as you were watching it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was like a feeling in the entire arena, maybe a hope from a lot of people too, that Dustin Poirier would do the unthinkable in some people's minds and get this done. And he had some moments in there. Definitely as the fight went on, he was able to figure out Islam's takedowns a lot more and stuff them and keep it on the feet, which allowed Islam to shine and show to people that he is much more than a grappler and has some really serious striking skills. I mean, you can make a strong argument he outstruck Dustin for a lot of those exchanges when they were on the feet. So that was extremely impressive. But as Nolan said, very commendable effort from Dustin Poirier. And here he's fighting the #1 pound for pound fighter in the world. We can get into who believes Islam is really #1 pound for pound in a bit here. But yeah, for Dustin, I think he put his best foot forward there. Of course, I'm sure a lot of people would have loved to see him actually get it done, but for what it was, I think he's got to be pretty happy with that, and he could leave with his head held high. And whether this is his last fight or not, I'm assuming it's his last title fight. That's probably a much more fair thing to say. And I know on paper it looks bad, 0 for 3 in undisputed title fights, all 3 by submission loss. That's something that he might be in kind of a category of his own as far as, historic wise. But when you actually watch the fights, the fighter, all that stuff. I don't think for Dustin Poirier, it's one he needs to be kicking himself and being too upset about. And I think you kind of saw that from him post-fight. After the losses to Khabib, Oliveira, he was much more emotional. He was crying at the press conference. We didn't get that version of him post-fight here. He was obviously disappointed, but there wasn't that same level of external emotion for him. So tough night in the end with the result, but I think he proved a lot. Islam proved a lot. Great fight. They saved what was an otherwise quite terrible fight card. So they got to be happy. That was one of the better fights of the year.
Goes and I were ranking it at giving it a letter grade of about a C, around the 6 range. And then the main event obviously boosted it a little bit. But Goes, we were on the edge of our seat in that main event, right? Both guys came to battle. You've seen a lot of fights. What were you thinking as this played out? And then let's transition into what Mike was saying, man. I don't want it to be Poirier's last fight, but go ahead, share your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was definitely fun. And, like Mike said, the card needed it. And when we add in the fact that the judging was absolutely insane that night, it even threw another wrinkle into your head, like what could actually be going on at this time. But I think both fighters kind of surprised each other, right? Like if you look at, not to call them deficiencies, but areas where both guys thought the other guy was lacking, they kind of came strong, right? Like Islam's striking wasn't bad. Dustin was great, fighting off some of the takedowns, getting up at times. I think they surprised each other, and we were able to see Islam kind of fight through adversity with that cut. A lot was proven in that fight, I think, for both fighters. Dustin Poirier, even though he lost, I mean, he took arguably the pound for pound guy to the limits there, right? So, I mean, it's not like you look at him and you say this guy doesn't have what it takes. But for Dustin Poirier, I've always been that guy where if a fighter says he wants to leave the sport because he's keeping his health in his mind, I'm not going to argue with that. If that's what he wants to do, I kind of commend that. But do I think he still has what it takes? I think he has what it takes to put up some really good fights, maybe some interesting matchups, and make some more money towards the end of the career. I know he says he has it, and he probably does, but I'm sure there are some scenarios that could make him some good money, and you just never know. But it was a little sad if this is in fact going to be his last fight. And if it is, though, hats off to this guy. He's one of those people where if you have kids and they're doing jiu-jitsu, wrestling, striking, whatever you want to maybe model after Dustin Poirier's career.
Mm-hmm. Guys, let's talk about the champ, Islam Makhachev. Yeah, there's some chinks in the armor. You can't get to him. He's not unbeatable, and that probably freshens things up for the other 55ers. Sometimes you look at the top and you're like, how am I going to deal with this monster, right? But no, this guy, looks, dare I say, beatable. I mean, you have to fight a perfect fight, but what is next for Makhachev? He doesn't like rematches, so he doesn't want to do Sarukian again because they met up years ago and he beat him already. But Sarukian, in my opinion, has earned the shot. He wants to be a champ. He says that's where the legacy, that's where the respect comes. I disagree. I think title defenses is your best way to lay legacies. And Edwards has a really, really, stacked division with a lot of title contenders. So what should be next for Makhachev? Mike, let's go to you for that one.
I think it's got to be the Sarukian rematch. That just makes too much sense to me right now. It's a perfect fight between these two. There's a storyline, there's a history, there's so much improvement on both sides from that first fight. Obviously, Islam's got like this championship and pound for pound aura now, and Arman has a lot of reason to feel that he can win that fight, knowing that the first time they fought, it was his UFC debut, 20 days notice. I believe they put on the fight of the night that evening. So like for him, you can build a lot of confidence off that. And especially having just beaten Charles Oliveira, all those elements, I think that's the right fight to make. I do think if Islam wins that, you could make a pretty good case that he's cleaned out most of the lightweight contenders at that point. Well, beaten someone like Arman twice. That's at the point where you can start calling for a move up. But then where do things get tricky, right? Like he's got Bilal Muhammad fighting for that welterweight title coming up in July. And if Bilal beats Leon Edwards, then it gets interesting because they've trained together. They have the same management, him and Islam. And I believe I've already seen Bilal say he's not overly interested in doing that fight. And Islam, when I asked him at the pre-fight media day, like what happens if Bilal wins, he kind of danced around the question a little bit, but he went back to, this is my dream. I want to do, have that second belt, and we'd have to figure it out. So I think he would probably be willing to fight Bilal if it came down to that. I'm sure in his perfect world, it's Leon. That fight was offered at UFC 300. He had to turn it down because of Ramadan. So he's already been offered the Leon Edwards fight once. So I don't think it's impossible to think we could get that again, maybe later this year or early next year. But I think first it's got to be Arman. I want to keep order here. And there's just so much on the line, right? Like he's currently tied for that title defense record overall in the division with BJ Penn, Benson Henderson, and Frankie Edgar, and Habib. And to set yourself apart at 4, given no one's been able to cross that threshold in the storied history of this lightweight division. I think that would be a really big deal, right? It was like for so long at heavyweight, everyone was tied for that record. And then finally Stipe broke it and had like 3 straight title defenses. And I think that's what gave him the argument for the greatest heavyweight of all time in a lot of people's minds. So to me, that's the right play. Allow Islam the chance to make that history. It's probably going to end up in Abu Dhabi, even though him and Arman both say it's their dream to fight at Madison Square Garden. But if you did, we'll get into that part of the conversation later. Could you imagine John Jones and Stipe and Islam versus Arman on the same card with this whole pound for pound debate between Jones and Islam? I think that would be a lot of fun and a good way to promote both guys. So I think that's kind of what the future holds here. Things can happen. Maybe someone gets hurt, et cetera, and the situation changes. But right now, Arman Tsarukyan absolutely deserving of a title shot. And despite Islam's reluctance and not wanting rematches, I think that's the fight that happens, and he takes it.
Mike, I will add, though, yes, he will have cleaned out most of the division, but I also like what Mateus Gamrot has been doing in the last few years. He's got 3 in a row. He's the guy that helped prep Dustin Poirier for that game plan to fight off Makhachev's wrestling. So I'd like to maybe see him get a shot before Makhachev moves on. But yeah, Tsarukyan's next for sure. Nolan King, your thoughts, man? Should we even be entertaining 170 at all, or should it just be shut down? It seems like both divisions kind of have work to do for both champs.
I'm not against it like in the future, but I think right now Mike's totally right. I mean, this is not a fight that we just saw. This is a rematch, but it's doesn't have many of the rematch elements that we're used to when it comes to title fights. I mean, this fight between the two of them happened years ago. Arman was making his UFC debut. Islam was still kind of a rising prospect that was turning into a contender. So both of these guys have come such a far distance since then that I think that this is just a really intriguing fight. Arman has done more than enough to earn his shot at Islam Makhachev. And I'm more concerned, honestly, about what it would do to welterweight. Like, I think there are a number of fighters who are like that one within an arm's reach of being the next contender up there. I know maybe at the top, we've seen Leon beat Kamaru. We've seen him beat Colby Covington. So those fights we've already seen, but like there's Ian Machado, Gary, there's who else is rising up right now? There's Shavkat, there's Jack Della. So there's all these new fighters up there, new matchups, new challenges. So I kind of, if there was really nobody at lightweight, you can make that argument. But for me, I think that to clog up welterweight right now and to have a great, really top tier elite, another one of those elite lightweight fights that you're just leaving on the table behind at 155, I think it would be doing a disservice to both divisions to do it right now. I'm not opposed to it. Maybe let's check back after Islam fights Arman if he gets through him.
My tail started wagging when Mike Bond brought up Tsarukyan and Makhachev on the same card as Jones and Miocic. Huge Russian population in New York. They love themselves a good lightweight title fight as well. But yes, man, let's start the early argument. Who, by the way, who is number one goes on your pound for pound list? Because if those two fight and defend, that's going to be a huge talking point leading to and obviously post fight. But as of right now, the announced team was telling us it was Makhachev. The president of the promotion says, no, it's Jones. What are your thoughts, man, on that topic alone? Makhachev now has his 3rd title defense, so he's 11 short of what Jones has done. Jones also has another belt to boast, right? Except he's only fought 8 times in the last 10 years and 1 time in the last 4 years, whereas Makhachev has kind of been, doing work here these last few years.
Well, I mean, it's an argument that we got to be careful with. It's ended friendships, family relationships, right? I mean, it's starting to get heated out there. But look, anytime you hear the broadcast team, you hear Dana White, look, I feel like what they're really trying to do is say, forget about Francis Ngannou. This guy's the man, right? Like, it's just, I don't know. I've heard so many different arguments. I feel like it's John Jones. I don't disagree too much with the points that are made on the Makhachev side. But for me, like, I just feel like as long as he remains active, because right now he feels like Jordan when he went to go play baseball. He's just kind of there, but not really. But he has 2 belts, in 2 different divisions. And that's why we kind of even bring up pound for pound, is usually fighters aren't supposed to do that, right? So he's never lost. It's just activity that's really, really killed him. And the fact that he hasn't been able to face Francis Ngannou, I mean, those are the holes that we poke at him, right? For Islam, I think what he's done is tremendous. I think he should just follow that GSP blueprint and just be a monster in your division. All right. Yes, you're going to break a record, but you know what? Pile on that record. So the next guy has an even higher mountain to climb. And then at the end, maybe challenge yourself and do 170. And he's working at such a high rate that it doesn't even really have to be towards the very end, but just give it some time and then maybe look at doing something at 175 because or at 170 because look, some people are going to poke holes, right? Like they're going to look at the first two fights with Volkanovski and say, look, that's a 145. And I get it. Volkanovski was game though, right? He took it to him the first fight. The second fight's a little bit harder to give him a pass for. But I don't hate the fact that people bring up Makhachev in that same conversation. But I just feel like as long as John Jones is still around, I think it's got to be him.
Okay. Mike, I know you had a friendly debate with Dana White about this. You presented the stats like you do. And you think right now it's actually Makhachev.
Yeah, I would put him there. And again, like when I got in that exchange with Dan, that wasn't me necessarily making the case for Islam. I was asking him, like, what in your mind would allow Islam to get to number one? And then my follow-up was just like, I guess from the skeptical point of view, he's being very active and Jones has only fought so many years. So like, why are you kind of putting it and calling anyone who ranks him number one Islam Makhachev number one? Would you say they're nuts, even though
and they shouldn't be on any panel or something like
yeah
that.
When they're literally the UFC's own rankings has Islam at number one? That's just like a whole other thing. And I know we have him at number two. I would have him at number one. I know that's a lot of your power wielding there, George, with our own personal rankings, and I'd like to hear your explanation too kind of at some point in this segment. But yeah, I mean, look at what Islam has been doing. Look at his past few fights. I believe going into when he fought Charles Oliveira in the UFC's rankings, Charles was number 2 or number 3 on their pound for pound list. Volkanovski was number 1 both times he fought him. When was the last time John Jones beat someone in the top 10 pound for pound? Like Daniel Cormier 7 years ago or something like that, right? And there's lots of debates. You could say, oh, well, Islam almost lost a decision to Volk in their first fight not long ago. Well, John Jones almost lost to Dominic Reyes in his 2 fights ago. So there's holes that can be poked in everyone's argument. It almost felt like Dana was kind of confusing like the GOAT debate with the pound for pound debate. Like, no question, John Jones' overall career significantly better at the moment, more bigger wins at the time, etc. But to me, pound for pound is more of like a recency thing. What are you doing at the moment? What kind of wins are you putting together? Who are you beating? How are you beating them, etc. And I know you could say, well, he just went tooth and nail and was cut up by Dustin Poirier and only put him away in the last round, where Jones went in there and won his last fight in 2 minutes. But who's proven more in the sport at this point, Ciryl Gane or Dustin Poirier? I think a lot of people would say Dustin Poirier. So, yeah, I mean, and I don't think if that idea does come to fruition where they're both on the same card, and you're going to be like, oh, John Jones gets to keep his number 1 pound for pound for beating a 43-year-old Stipe Miocic who hasn't fought in 4 years. And you're going to punish Islam for beating Arman Sarukian, who's a 25-year-old killer at the peak of his powers, things like that. So to me, I do think Islam is doing things at a bit of a higher level right now and not trying to diminish anything John Jones has done. He is amazing and had an insane career. I just would like to see a little more activity. If he was fighting twice a year against the top contender, I think he's that guy. But right now, lightweight, a much tougher division. He's fighting the more competitive guys, the more relevant guys at the moment. And I think you reward him for that.
Mike, I know that there is, he hasn't fought in a while, but the pound for pound's about challenging yourself, right? And how big of a challenge is going from 205 to face monsters at heavyweight? That win doesn't kind of make up a little bit for the inactivity, just a little. I mean, that is a big feat, man, to go up there and do that.
It was a good win for sure, but like we're sitting here, we're pretending Ciryl Gane didn't just get like out wrestled by Francis Ngannou and lose the decision 2 fights before that. Like, Ciryl Gane's good and stuff, and I know he was ranked, but he was only ranked where he was because Francis Ngannou was gone. I know that like Dana technically saying it was the top heavyweight in the world, I guess in the UFC's rankings at that point, but that's because a very notable person was no longer there with the company in the fight we wanted to see. If John Jones had beaten Francis Ngannou in that heavyweight debut, this is not even a discussion, right? Like you could say a lot of different things, but yeah, just right now, like doesn't quite do as much for me, that win, even though you're talking about moving up.
Volk is a featherweight, right? And the second one, he barely had any time to prepare. I mean,
that's not Islam's fault, though. Charles Oliveira pulled out of the rematch.
But nobody's putting a gun to his head to take the match. Gamrot could have fought, right?
Okay, well,
he's supposed to be next.
You want to compare who did what when he pulled out, when Charles Oliveira pulled out of that fight? What did Islam Makhachev do? He didn't hesitate for a second to take that rematch with Volk, where he had so much to lose. What happened when Dan Henderson pulled out of UFC 151 and they wanted Chael Sonnen to go in on a week's notice? John Jones said no, and they canceled the entire event. So Islam Makhachev's mentality is towards that stuff is clearly different. He's there at the press conference saying it makes no sense to rematch Arman Tsarukyan, but if Dana calls me and says that's the fight they want, I will take it. No hesitation. Let's go.
I guess for me, like, and this is my feelings about the pound for pound in general, is like, this is a debate on making it. I mean, this initially, the pound for pound debate came in so that lighter guys would get more credit for their abilities within their division. So the fact that somebody took a fight here or didn't take a fight there, I don't think is really relevant to this conversation, but it speaks to a bigger thing, which I think this argument in general is so arbitrary and people have so many different definitions of it that, not to rain on everybody's parade, but I do think sometimes people get really carried away with something that doesn't necessarily have a clear definition. This is very subjective. But for me, if I'm going to give my definition, if I'm going to kind of go draw a line here, I think what Mike said to start, which is that it seemed Dana was confusing the greatest fighter of all time with the greatest fighter right now. It's the same reason why I don't have Anderson Silva in my current middleweight rankings. It's because he's done great things, and we can talk about it in terms of a lifetime, the greatest middleweight ever. But right now, he's not the greatest middleweight ever. So I kind of view this as a similar thing within this sort of fanatical debate about what it means for somebody to be better than somebody else that are, one guy weighs twice as much as the other one. So it's weird, but I think you have to go with Islam right now.
For sure. And it makes sense. Like, what's pound for pound, right? Like, how would someone's skill set translate at any weight class? Like, John Jones and Islam Makhachev are both insanely well-rounded. They would do, if you blew them up or shrunk them down to any weight, they would be extremely successful in any division. So it is splitting hairs. That's what I put in my column yesterday to Nolan's point. Like, this is all fictional. It literally means nothing pound for pound. Like, it's great to have the title attached. I know it means a lot to Islam to be like noted as the best fighter in the world. It clearly means a lot to John Jones too, given some of those tweets he was putting out in response to Dana's comments and to Islam's performance. So yeah, we could sit here and literally talk about this all day because there's no true correct answer on what it means. It's subjective. Everyone has their own opinion. Everyone has their own things they value, but it is a debate we have. And I think there's points to be made on all sides here. But me personally right now, I'm sitting here covering 2 Islam Makhachev fights a year. I've covered 1 John Jones fight in the last 5 years. So it's kind of hard for me to sit here and talk about a guy I never see fight.
I think by the definition of what would happen, the only guy we don't have to ask that question about is John, because he has done it. He has gone up into another division and he won a belt. We have to ask that question. Still,
Islam wants to do it. And again, so if Islam goes up and wins that title, Leon Edwards beats Bilal and is on a 14 fight unbeaten streak or whatever it is, 13 fights, and Islam beats him, then what happens, right? Like, does that undeniably lock up his case? And if he does, from what it sounds like talking to him, it doesn't sound like he wants to do like a permanent vacate the title, move to welterweight. I think he wants to do both, which I don't think that would be possible given he needs to take a portion of the year off for Ramadan and stuff. I don't think you could do those 2 divisions given, as Nolan said earlier, how deep they are, especially welterweight coming up. It'd be hard to juggle, but from the way he's talked about it, it seems like he would want to go up. If he wins that title, he would still come back down and defend it against whoever emerges as the top contender at that time. So if he was able to pull something off like that, that's a game changer. But right now, I think, his big goal is get that belt at 170. And I think that does alter this argument a lot.
All right, great job, guys. Great debate. No one's wrong. It's subjective. I wish I would have made some popcorn before we started this segment. Mike and Goes are like two dudes in an apartment. Hey, turn the volume down. Goes with the broom hitting Mike, and then Mike turning it up on purpose even more.
We're scrapping over this later when I come to Vegas.
Why do I have to be the old man with the broom? Why can't I be the other guy?
If that
Well, I
fun
don't know,
happens.
but it was you both brought up great points, and honestly, this thing could shift from fight to fight. Jones's inactivity does hurt him, but the fact that he's won 2 titles does help him. There's no right or wrong. I want to know from the chat, what do you guys think? Just give me a simple answer: Jones or Makhachev, or keep it simple and tell us what you think. Maybe we'll circle back to it because this has probably been my favorite part of the show. Wanted to give a quick shout out to David Warman, who's watching from Scotland. Billy247, he's in Dallas, Texas. Elegance Betgidio or something like that. He says he's a fan from a flag I don't recognize, but it looks Portuguese or something like that. That green and red. I'm not sure. But anyway, if you want to leave a comment, please do. Nicholas Alvarado, I'm seeing you. Go ahead, have fun, do your thing. But man, put down the Red Bull, buddy. You're jumping from topic to topic. Kind of follow suit how this show's going. Stop acting like a twat. All right. The one thing that Dana White did say, and I'm going to chime in on because we got to move on, is just he said John Jones is the greatest combat sports athlete ever. Man, we could spend a whole hour just on this alone, but I just don't think he's there yet. I think what Henry Cejudo was able to do, which is match John Jones, except he did it simultaneously and defended each one once, and then has a gold medal to show. That's impressive. And then the other one I can think of is Alex Verjeda, multiple division winner in kickboxing at the highest level, and now in the UFC. I mean, he would have an argument when you can do it in another sport at a high level like that. That should be taken very, very seriously.
And he also said John Jones is like the only one who's taken a multi-year layoff and come back and performed at that level. I believe a fellow Canadian of mine, Mr. George St. Pierre, did something similar when he came back. And you know, you could make an argument about where Michael Bisping was at his career, but he basically did that same thing. So it's not.
And he also said if Jones walks into a room with another person, John Jones always comes out. He's probably right, but man, I still have the doubts on who walks out between Ngannou and Jones. I know 2 years ago I didn't think John Jones was going to be the one walking out. I don't know. Francis hasn't been training as much. He's been boxing, but see, that's a question that Dana White couldn't answer for us. They couldn't make it happen, and that's why there's these doubts that are out there.